so much for being here. I've shared with the students a little bit about you. I've shared with them that you're a wonderful person, a dear friend, a supporter of mindfulness, both at the law school and in our community. A little bit about how you shared with us in the readings, how you got a little interested in mindfulness, and when that was and what prompted it, but there's not been a lot of discussion of that. Do not interrupt as a practice. We've practiced it, reminded ourselves about it, and I'm grateful to you and Marta for all that you have done, continue to do, and I'm so grateful that you're here today. Please, I know that your time is tight, so take it away and please leave when it makes sense to me.
Thank you. So part of what I do is courtroom and trial work. And there's a lesson for trial lawyers that most never learn. And that is when to shut up and stop speaking. That lesson informed me, based on Scott's introduction, to shut up and say thank you and leave, because it's not going to get a whole bunch better than that. So thank you, Scott. Thank you for your grace and patience, as I've already expressed to some of you, for excusing. I hope you will excuse my kindness. Bless you. I'm very much looking forward to your visit. I am going to need to leave at about 11:20 to make it to a partners meeting at our firm at noon. I want to share a brief note of personal pride on my part. My record remains unblemished, that I got lost trying to find a law building here. I've been coming here to do this class with Scott for many, many years, and every single time I've not remembered exactly where that is from where I park at various visits, so my record remains unblemished. It probably won't surprise you that I'm going to begin my remarks by offering and intending to listen and instead of speak at the beginning. And I'd love to respond to questions that you have and learn from you, from your experimentation with the do not interrupt practice. I completely agree with Scott's premise that this do not interrupt practice and way of conducting oneself is indeed a mindfulness practice, and at the same time immensely useful in gathering data that can be significant to the decisions we make about how we present, what we say, what we don't say, and how we behave, and not insignificantly for lawyers, and maybe for all of us today, it's also polite. I do want to save time after responding to your inquiries about that, or the discussion that I hope we'll have, to share with you an important point that may not be clear in my initial article that was assigned to you many, many weeks ago, that you probably had fade from your memory some, given the other wonderful teachings and articles that you've read since it was assigned when I was intending to be here on March 29th and couldn't make it to a client service command and out-of-town travel. There's something that has been involved in my thinking that I want to share, but I'll do that after. Anyone comfortable sharing either your experience with the do not interrupt practice, maybe anything that surprised you as a result of practice, both your own internal reaction to it, challenges, successes, and the reaction of counterparties. If you've made it evident in dealing with counterparties that you were making an effort not to interrupt, or questions about the article or about me.
And if we could, good, I'm glad. I would love to, everybody who would like to have an opportunity to talk and to engage, and just because of our time, please, if you do begin to offer more than less, be attentive to the amount of time so that the questions can be said succinctly, and then have as much engagement and dialogue as we can. So with that, it's just tiny caveat. Yeah, please, some of you all. And say your name if you would when you begin talking.
Hi, my name is Eric.
Eric.
I have a brief thing to say and then a quick question. I'll just say that I found it surprising, like that it's actually a difficult task to practice do not interrupt, especially like I notice an urge to interrupt when I feel like someone doesn't really know what they're talking about and I want to correct them. I'll feel an impulse, and I was just surprised when I really started to pay attention that it's actually difficult to refrain. My question to you is, interrupting is often rude, unproductive. Sometimes you could argue that it's a tool to make the conversation more efficient, or whatever. So I guess my question is, how do you say to yourself when it's a good time to practice do not interrupt and when it is appropriate to interrupt, or do you always practice do not interrupt?
Okay. It's really hard. And if you advance with your legal degree into law practice, I think you're going to find it more difficult. If you remember this, one of the points that I made in the Fort Bar Journal article is that especially in the legal community, inside law firms and in engagement with client representatives and counterparties, there is a overwhelming practice and even culture in some law firms, and certainly on the part of many lawyers, that interrupting earlier and maybe frequently is indicia of being the smartest person in the room. It usually starts with, I got that. So you're looking for a little prize. I already know your point, and I'm prepared to respond to it without hearing. So it's going to get, in my experience, doing law stuff in private practice for 40 and a half years, it's going to get worse. So you said sometimes it might be more efficient to interrupt. Okay, so let's just probe that a tiny bit. Eric, you and I have never spoken before today, but you don't know what. Often in engagements, in interactions, lawyers with clients, lawyers with counterparty lawyers, lawyers are dealing with counterparties and clients with whom they've not interacted before. You might be a person who, in an interaction even with a new counterparty with whom you are unfamiliar, that you will go right to the point that's on your mind and that's most important to you. Expressing a vulnerability, the doubt, and the concern. And that may be Eric. In my experience, very few people fit that. And most people, especially with new counterparties, have a warm-up period. And they're speaking, and it may be inefficient in terms of the amount of time that elapses before what's really important comes out, but they're warming themselves up to get there, to get comfortable to share and I'm not talking about only interpersonal relationship issues, but to get to the business, the legal point, the vulnerability, that they just need to hear themselves speak a little bit, they need to get into a rhythm, they need to observe the counterparty, in this instance, Eric, to get comfortable and decide when to put out what's most important. And so I invite you to reconsider, or at least think about the idea that there may be a presumptive efficiency of interrupting early, because you may be cutting off the person from getting to what's really important to her. Give it some thought.
Do you think there's a difference in a situation that Eric, for example, is sharing, and in any situation like you're speaking to, a warm-up and getting to know, where one might be different in terms of whether they do decide to interrupt, if they are noticing that they have this Eric said, impulse, like I feel I need to interrupt, like I almost can't help myself, or I think this is something that might be useful to say. Now, in both cases, it might be a good idea to not. But is there a difference between sort of that one agitated, impulse-oriented, and a more deliberate consideration?
I think there is. I think there is. So let me skip way ahead of where I thought the discussion would go. And with Eric, your question, and Scott, your very thoughtful follow-up drawing this distinction. If I had it to do over again, in coming up with this idea of, well, I don't know if I came up with it, in articulating this and in my thinking about how I engage with this do not interrupt concept, I don't take credit. I don't know where it came from. Maybe I read it somewhere, maybe I used the words, maybe Scott and I were taking a walk and we came up with it together. I don't know. So be very clear, I'm not the patriarch of this idea. But when I think about it now, and were I to write about it again, I would change it from DNI to DNMI. And the M would be mindlessly. Do not mindlessly interrupt. If you're going to interrupt, be thoughtful. Why are you doing it? What interest do you think you're serving? What might be the consequences of it? I was in a all-day contested hearing in federal court on Monday, and I promise you this is true. I very purposely, in just a matter of seconds, made the affirmative decision to interrupt a federal judge. It was not accidental, it was not impulsive. And it worked. In that instance, it worked. And Judge Wilson felt a little bit surprised but not offended. And it helped right track the advocacy in the way I wanted it to go. So it's not a per se rule, to your point and to your question. And in that instance, was it efficient? I think so. I think it served my advocacy interests and my client's interests. But I just invite you to consider this DNMI. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is, maybe not bad news, the cost of dialing the M into DNI is, in my estimation, imposes on me a greater responsibility to be mindful of what's happening in the interaction and to be thoughtful about taking the action of mindfully and purposefully interrupting. And that goes back to mindful listening as a mindfulness practice, to be hyper-focused on the self-awareness of the interchange, both bucket one in my three bucket of three buckets of data construct that I really do pay a lot of attention to, which is myself, two, counterparty, three, the environment. It puts a lot of pressure on buckets 1 and 2 to be hyper-focused. So, long time to respond. I wouldn't say answer your question, but was any of this responsive, Eric?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you for the question. You had a question, I don't know your name.
Yes, hi, I'm Gabby.
Gabby?
Yes.
Hi, Gabby.
You were kind of getting to it, I think, when you add the M to the do not mindlessly interrupt. When I practiced do not interrupt, I had, one, I noticed how often I wanted to, which I think I had a realization of, wow, I've been interrupting so many people so many times, I don't know, like, not that I had no idea I was doing it, but it was mindless. But I had an experience when I was practicing where I was talking with a friend, and my friend starts to like just down information on me for like 15 minutes, and I wanted to be, it was like a, you know, what do you think about this? Can I get some advice? And I wanted to be helpful. And I found that as more and more time went on, and I felt like overwhelmed with information. And by the end of it, I was like, I don't think I'm retaining any of this.
You said that to her or to your friend?
No, internally.
Okay, good.
Internally. I didn't interrupt, but I did start. I didn't know if I want to, like, man, my friends are talking forever. I don't want to interrupt because I don't know if it would be helpful at this point. So I guess my question to you was going to be when, if you think there's a time that it's okay to interrupt, and I guess you kind of, it sounds like the answer is yes, as long as it's done mindfully.
Yeah, so this happens all the time. And in my world, maybe yours, Gabby, it starts like, hey Gabby, do you have 2 minutes? You say, sure, because you listen carefully, it's 2 minutes. And 20 minutes later, you know, your counterparty has an inhale, right? I have this practice at work of keeping my door open almost 100% of the time, purposefully inviting people to come in. And many times a week, sometimes many times a day, someone will say, you have 2 minutes. And I will try to say yes. And I'll turn around and try and focus and go away from my computer and my phone. And then it'll be 20 minutes later, or 15. And I've gotten very comfortable with saying, you know, hey Gabby, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I tried to be available. You indicated that, you know, maybe we'd be visiting for a couple of minutes. I'm very happy to continue this discussion, but I can't give you the attention that the discussion warrants now. When could we get back together and plan for, you know, setting aside 20 minutes? Because I think it's polite. I think it's honest. I mean, I'm where you are. If somebody said 2 or 3 minutes and I'm under a bunch of deadlines, as hard as I might try, I'm not going to be available to that person. I'm going to be thinking about all the stuff that I'm falling further behind on. And that would be super inefficient communication. Because Gabby's counterparty, my counterparty, probably is sensing pretty soon that the counterparty's not really getting my attention or Gabby's. And might not appreciate that. Whereas the clear, direct, polite, considerate communication of, I can't be available for you right now, and I'd like to be available, it's important to me if it's important to you, when can we reconvene? Questions, other questions and comments? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Lucas. Nice
Hey,
to meet
Lucas.
you. So I have 2 questions. So when you said do not mindfully interrupt,
I'm sorry, I said mindlessly.
mindlessly, do not mindlessly interrupt. That when you do interrupt, I'm assuming you do so in a very polite way. When you
That's interesting.
very polite and soft-spoken. So I was like wondering how, in order to not come off like abrasively, like are you mindfully aware of when you interrupt someone to come across in like a cordial way?
When I make a decision And by the way, I want to be super clear. I screw this up a lot. There are many times, I hope not many times a day, where I mindlessly interrupt, reactively, not thoughtfully and purposefully. So I'm not 100% on this, and I will continue to aspire to be, but I don't think I'll ever achieve perfection. And there's a whole other part about perfection in the solo practitioner's article that you guys read or may have read. So bottom line, Lucas, straight out, I will and do and probably will continue to sometimes interrupt very impolitely. And is it theater? Yeah. What I try to do is know I'm doing it, right? And not have it be reactive. And sometimes I'll do it in the courtroom, sometimes I'll do it in a deposition, sometimes I'll do it on a phone call or in a virtual meeting. I just want to know that it's being done mindfully and purposefully to make a point. Because sometimes we don't get always to pick our counterparties. And sometimes that's the only mode that will work with certain counterparties. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it's a disaster, and I make the wrong call. So default rule, you bet. Polite, an apology for the interruption, an explanation that doesn't take too long to get to the reason for the interruption. Maybe it's going to be, as Eric suggests, may I interrupt to try and make our conversation more efficient? Default rule, 100%. Collaboratively, politely, and sincerely offer the interruption. I think that was your first question. You said you had two.
Yeah. What have you always been like this? What prompted this transition in your way of thought? Have you always been so like aware of interrupting others? Is this because you used to interrupt others a lot before? I relate to that. I speak a lot, so I interrupt people a lot, and I've been trying to stop that in order to have better relationships with people. So I just wanted to hear on that.
So that's easy for me. And I'm glad you asked the question. The answer is no. I've not always had this do not interrupt as a goal. To the contrary, I was reared in a law firm culture, and a couple of my mentors in particular, me and I mindlessly adopted the practice as a young lawyer of thinking that the first interrupter was the smartest person in the room. I got it, and then, or sometimes worse, I got it, you don't need to say anything more, right? I hear that still multiple times a week. So no, I'm not a lifelong subscriber to do not interrupt. It's been a very, very hard habit to try and change. Gabby, let me go to your colleague who has not yet asked a question yet first. But hold on before I do that. Lucas, is that responsive to your questions?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was curious about. Because I'm very extroverted. I tend to cut people off sometimes, and I've noticed that, for example, my father is the opposite, and I've noticed that sometimes when we have conversations, I tend to cut him short, which is not what I want to do, because I want to listen to him. It's actually the complete opposite of what I want to do. So I've been focusing on not being so reactive, and even if I have heard him say the thing 100 times, I just sit there and listen to it, because I don't know it as well as he does at the end of the day, so I just want to, even if I have heard it 100 times, I'll hear it 200 times, just because I want to digest it. So I just want to, that's why I said that, and I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Tell me your name.
Hi, my name is Kaylin.
Hi, Kate.
Kaylin, it's no T.
Oh, Caitlin. Nice, thank you.
No worries, thank you. So my practice with DNI has been really beneficial. I didn't realize that I was practicing it before until your article. It like made more of an articulation of what I was already doing, because I've had conversations with people and I felt like I would always get interrupted. And I would realize that, and I started realizing that, and I would also see my conversations with people where somebody is getting interrupted, and it's like, how are you responding if you don't even know what that other person is saying? So I kind of appreciated how you put it in the article, so thank you for that. And my question is, or like my conflict with it is that when I am practicing, I tend to forget, and like I'm forgetful, so if I let the person continue talking, there's certain points that I do want to respond, and then I notice the thought, and I think that's one important aspect of even deciding whether your contribution is efficient or not, that you actually have to notice that's just the thought, and then you can respond to it accordingly. But I notice the thoughts, and then I have a thought about noticing the thoughts, and then I'm like, dang, should I interrupt or not? And then I'm like, I'm gonna remember what I wanna say at the end also. So how do you navigate handling whether you're gonna remember your thought after, or even if you should go back to like those earlier thoughts that you had, like how do you navigate that?
It's really a good question, and the answer is it's really hard. And this may in part be a generational thing too. I don't know. I'm a little bit older than you are. I've told lawyers with whom I work for my entire career, don't come to a meeting without a pad of paper and a pen. Now it's a computer or iPad or a smartphone. I used to have meetings that I would insist there was no technology. Now that, of course, would work, and I get that. But if you look right at what's happening in our discussion, I have a pad and a pen, and I've tried to discreetly, write a few words down when Eric was talking and when Gabby was talking. I don't know if I wrote it down when Lucas was talking. It's hard, and it's especially hard now with using technology to help. If people keep notes in meetings, I do all the time, because once you get on your computer or smartphone to make a note, and an inbound text comes, or a pop-up comes, or your phone rings, it's really hard. I don't have a really good answer. And I will tell you this, if it's an interaction that I have a sense is going to be important, I try to be in a position of being able to take notes. I know that's really low tech, probably suboptimal answer to your question, but it's really hard. And there's a trade, right? If you make the decision not to interrupt, and it's a long presentation and you're not taking notes, there's a risk you're going to lose a point. So I've never said this out loud. I think I've thought it before. Maybe one solution is to ask for permission to interrupt and say, let me just make sure I get this point before you go on, and ask and reflect on what you think the point is, get affirmation or correction, and then invite your counterpart to continue.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Thank you. That's really a hard one. So I want to ask this. I'm always curious about the answer to this question. Any surprising data from counterparties when you're succeeding in the do not interrupt exercise about not being interrupted. Any surprising reactions from your counterparties when you are not interrupting in your exchanges with them? Yes, sir.
Hello, my name's Cameron.
Cameron, thanks.
This is less of an example of like the legal world and more just relationships in general. I've noticed that when I'm practicing DNI, people love to hear themselves talk, and people love to talk about themselves. And when you're not interrupting and letting them talk, they leave the conversation being like, wow, that was a great conversation, even though I might not have even said something and they dominated the time. But it's been a useful tool.
Yeah, I'm laughing because my father-in-law, who's passed away, was a college professor and academic, and ended his professional career after being Dean of Arts and Sciences at Florida for 10 years. And he taught me 43 years ago, when you listen to people, they really think you're smart. I found that to be true. Any other reactions in addition to the one Cameron shared about the counterparty thinking it was a really good conversation when it wasn't really even a conversation, but an opportunity for the counterparty to share? Kaylin?
So my partner, he'll like repeat himself, like he doesn't think I'm listening. So I have to assure him and provide that, like, no, I'm listening, I'm just practicing mindfulness. But he'll repeat himself because he doesn't think that I'm listening.
So it's causing him concern that you're not interrupting.
Some people I talk to, they kind of opened up more than I feel like in my normal conversations. I feel like a lot of times we're all kind of, we have points in our head like we're planning on bringing up when we start the conversation, and we're just waiting for a way to weave it back into whatever they're saying, just kind of waiting for a point to divert it. So I felt good knowing that I think like some people I talked to left the conversation feeling a bit more like they got to express themselves, and we probably got into things we wouldn't have gone into for a long time. But I will say with some family members, our conversations usually, I feel like some family members of mine kind of just bring up very mundane things, like only what's going on in the moment right now. And when I try not interrupting them, it's kind of just went a bit stale. So I think in some conversations I do need to carry it, but not interrupting wise, probably I think from here, I would just hear them out and then bring something else more interesting up and see if they bite. That's all.
Got it, thank you. Any other counterparty reactions to share? Yep.
Hi, I'm Ariana.
Hi, Ariana.
So I noticed when I try it over the phone, people think that the call fails or like I'm not responding, so my phone's not working and they lost, I don't know, a connection. So I don't think it really works over the phone, personally.
Yeah, Ariana, I've had that experience too. Isn't that amazing that just by not interrupting, people think the call's ready? That's just fascinating to me in and of itself. Yep.
Hi, I'm Janine.
Hi, Janine.
Speaking to Ariana's back, I think instead of maybe interrupting someone, you can just kind of like make like a noise or something to let them know that you're still there. So like as they're talking, you or like yeah. And I've noticed that because I tend to also want to interrupt, but then like my best friend, like when I don't interrupt, she's like, are you listening to me? Are you there? But so I've mindfully tried to just like make a noise or something so she knows that I am still there listening.
Yeah, I think that's a really thoughtful tactic, Janine. And none of this happens right in a real-time engagement because there's visual connection and body language that can give assurances of being attentive. I've had in my life experience, and I've heard others in this classroom and elsewhere say that there was, there has been on occasion a reaction of discomfort and agitation by the counterparty who is kind of off. It's unfamiliar to have a conversation without a chronic interruption. And that fascinates me too, that there might be agitation or maybe even frustration or a presumption that the mindful listener wasn't present because of not interrupting. I just think that's a wonderful irony. Don't know if any of you experienced it.
For me, I'm Matthew, by the way. I find it hard, especially like in group settings. Like if you don't interrupt, you're not talking in the group. That's what I feel like most of the time. Because like one person hasn't finished talking, and another person in that group is going to be interrupting them to take over the conversation. So if you don't interrupt, you're probably not going to be saying much. In like a group setting, I feel like. And then a single setting, I feel like I always like forget what I want to say. So like while I'm trying not to interrupt, I'm trying to remember everything I want to like say, so that I'm not as mindful to what they're saying. I'm not listening as well as I should have. That's what I feel like.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute. I've visited with this idea a lot, and I've postulated that there's this spectrum on the DNI scale. And on one end of the spectrum is what I've called white knuckle listening, which is on the journey to mindful listening, but not really, because the goal is just, clench your teeth hard enough, close your jaws, focus on just don't say anything. And all of my attention goes into not saying anything, and I'm probably not listening very well and taking in data at all, right? And that's why this is it's called an exercise, because you gotta do it to get better at it. You gotta develop the pattern and discipline and go from white knuckle listening, which just means you get an award for not speaking, to being comfortable not speaking and having one's attention be the counterparty who's speaking. That's the mindfulness practice part, right? So if you think there's an upside for you in this practice, if you do, you might not, but if you do, stay at it, because what you're experiencing is, in my experience, the first part of the journey. It's perfectly predictable. And it will get easier if you practice. And if the result of your practice is you think it's enhancing your personal relationships and your performance in your professional capacity of making use of the additional data that you're gathering from being a better and more mindful listener.
I think we have just a minute or so before you are heading out. So if you haven't asked a question and you would like to, now would be the time, and or please, however you would like us to close.
No,
If you could give us some advice, you said you've been practicing mindfulness for what, like 30 years, you said?
No. I think now about closer to 13, more than 10 years. I don't know exactly.
So from everything you've experienced now, if you could give yourself advice, year 1, year 2, what would it be? Especially as like young lawyers entering the community.
This isn't, Scott will know, Professor Rogers will know, to whom this quote is properly attributed. So I'm footnoting an anonymous friend. If you have it in your mind's eye that you don't have time to meditate for 5 minutes a day, meditate for 10 minutes a day. I meant what I said in the Fort Bar Journal and the ABA solo practitioners interview. The return on investment for me in both my personal life and my professional life from embarking on the study and practice of mindfulness has been, I think, one of the most significant, positive parts of my life, period. And it's not close. There's this tease in the solo practitioner article about the study and practice of mindfulness being a way to control the future. I don't know if you remember reading it, it's only like a tiny little paragraph. And the explanation for that is the self-awareness, thoughts, feelings, emotions, especially in matters that are super important, that hit buttons, that set off the possibility for reactive and regrettable statements and conduct. The benefits of having the self-awareness that that's coming and the ability, having the awareness to avoid saying things and doing things that might take an immense amount of energy and time to fix, to repair, and sometimes that might be irreparable with significant consequences, personally or professionally. It's huge. So I couldn't, if I had 3 more hours, overstate the significance to me and the value that's available to all of us from continuing this study and practice. So one thing I will leave you with, because I do have to go, we didn't talk about this, and sometimes I do, and maybe you can visit with each other or reflect individually, or maybe when I leave, visit with Scott about this. I don't think I need to be a victim, an endless victim of being interrupted. It's useful for me to think about how to deal with chronic interrupters. And there are a lot of choices, right? One is to do nothing. The other is to find a way to inquire at an appropriate time and maybe without interrupting of a counterparty. Are you aware of how much you're interrupting me or others that may be impairing advancing this discussion? Another is the use of humor, which I try first when I'm in this position, often by apologizing to the interrupter by saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak when you were interrupting, or whatever's comfortable for you that has a humorous twist that might take the edge off it. Think about that too, because it's important to some people to be heard, but that doesn't mean that important objective for the interrupter deserves the priority over me and us being heard. So give thought to that too. This isn't by practicing DNI with DNMI, surrendering to being chronically interrupted by the counterpart. So I apologize. I know I was tardy and didn't mean any disrespect. I'm very grateful that I was able to visit with you on your second to last class in this term. I hope that you will reflect on what a blessing it is for you all to have the opportunity to set aside this time. The University of Miami School of Law has made this course and Professor Rogers available to you. I never had this opportunity in law school. Scott created this law school curriculum nationally, and the program here is the first of its kind in the country. And I also am mindful and aware that I never had a single class in law school in which the professor brought cookies and breakfast bars, and that's another thing for which you should be very grateful.
Let's stay and we'll continue with what you offered us as an opportunity to explore. Thank you, Paul, very much. Get it back.
Be well all. Good luck.
Thank you.